I want to talk about some hard things today. We live in a time when we have more access to information than any generation in history, and yet it's never been harder to talk to one another.
Yeah, go eat. You might feel better after you eat.
Keep your hand to yourself.
Many of the conversations that we have aren't just ending in disagreement, they're ending in offense and withdrawal or just silence altogether.
What is wrong with you people? I thought you were supposed to be friends!
And what's striking about that is it's usually not because of lack of facts. It's because truth itself has started to feel unsafe. So let's talk about why people have become hardened to the truth. And the problem that we're witnessing today is not just disagreement. It's the inability to hear truth without experiencing it as some sort of threat. If you find yourself in a conversation in which there is a disagreement that happens, whether that's with belief or some sort of truth that you don't necessarily agree with, people can typically respond feeling like they're being attacked, or that you're invalidating their identity in some way, or that what you're saying is actually dangerous. And this actually tells us something pretty important. It tells us that the issue isn't just the content alone, it's all about perception. And that's what I want to talk about today, this idea of perception shaping our beliefs. So let's walk through some of these modern social dynamics that can explain this surface level behavior. These are not moral judgments by any means. These are more just descriptive tools to kind of identify the problem. The first one that I want to talk about is called affective polarization. And Cambridge.org describes affective polarization as the tendency to evaluate in-party members positively and out-party members negatively. So it's basically talking about the social condition in which people, they are not only disagreeing with opposing views, but there's this emotional sense to it where they dislike or distrust those who hold those beliefs. And on the stanford.edu website, I wanted to read something about affective polarization. This article, it's the annual review of political science, and it says the title is The Origins and Consequences of Affective Polarization in the United States. So the abstract here is what I'm going to read to you. While previously polarization was primarily seen only in issue-based terms, a new type of division has emerged in the mass public in recent years. Ordinary Americans increasingly dislike and distrust those from the other party. Democrats and Republicans both say that the other party's members are hypocritical, selfish, and closed-minded, and they are unwilling to socialize across party lines. This phenomenon of animosity between the parties is known as affective polarization. We trace its origins to the power of partisanship as a social identity and explain the factors that intensify partisan animus. So this is mostly talking about the polarization, and a lot of what I've read about affective polarization is in relation to politics. However, it does not only affect politics. This can be used for any kind of ideology in which there are sides to be taken. So the reality is that disagreement feels like a personal attack.
Is that like a personal attack or something?
Because the opponents are seemingly immoral or malicious in some way. And the result is that truth is evaluated based on who the person is, rather than what the statement actually is or what the belief actually is. And from this viewpoint, the disagreement becomes more of an emotional one. And once emotions are in play, any rational exchange can become harder, or it can even shut down the discussion altogether. And with affective polarization, encountering truth can be experienced as a threat. This is the easiest to see in political polarization. The left often views the right as morally bad people, while the right tends to see the left as actively harming society. In these conversations, truth no longer lands as something to be examined or considered. What it boils down to is not only what is being said, but how it's being received. Okay, so the next thing that I want to talk about is identity fusion. This is from EBSCO, and this article is called Identity Fusion. The beginning says, identity fusion is a concept in social psychology that describes a unique phenomenon where an individual's personal identity becomes deeply intertwined with their social identity, creating a strong sense of belonging to a group. This fusion can lead individuals to exhibit extreme behaviors comparable to familial loyalty, such as making personal sacrifices for the group's sake, including risking their safety or engaging in costly actions. So, in this case, a person's beliefs inhabit them. And when you're challenging any of those beliefs, even if you're humble and your tone is right, it feels like you're challenging the self. Truth as they know it becomes experienced as an existential threat. Questions to them feel hostile, correcting them feels humiliating, and asking them to clarify may feel more like you're attempting to dominate them rather than to genuinely understand where they're coming from. And when these beliefs are fused with identity, this is what becomes problematic. And I think it's one of the most dangerous ones because you lock yourself into an ideology that will be hard to change. When you believe something that ties into your identity, your curiosity diminishes because it risks destabilization. So doubting the belief feels like a betrayal, like you're doing something wrong, and your mind becomes imprisoned and less likely to evaluate the ideas because it feels the need to protect itself. And although it's not always tied together, identity fusion can be a supplier of this emotional fuel for what we talked about previously, the effect of polarization. And it does so because it produces this strong in-group loyalty and equally strong out-group suspicion. So it becomes less about the evaluation of the claims people are making and more about whether they signal allegiance. Okay, and at this point, truth can become intolerable for someone, and it can become more difficult to accept because it requires the separation from this belief identity bundle, and changing your mind feels like you're losing a part of yourself. These types of people appear stubborn or even closed-minded, but on the inside, they're actually defending their safety and the way that they make sense of the world. This means that intellect and knowledge aren't the battles to be fought. They're protecting who they believe themselves to be. And this is why persuasion can often backfire. It's not about stupidity, it's about self-protection. Okay, so now we're getting into the spiral of silence. And this comes from masscomtheory.com. And it is called the spiral of silence. I'm going to read you the definition. It says, originally proposed by German political scientist Elisabeth Noel Neumann in 1974, spiral of silence is the term meant to refer to the tendency of people to remain silent when they feel that their views are in opposition to the majority view on a subject. The theory posits that they remain silent for a few reasons. Number one, fear of isolation when the group or public realizes that the individual has a divergent opinion from the status quo. And number two, fear of reprisal or more extreme isolation in the sense that voicing said opinion might lead to a negative consequence beyond that of mere isolation, such as loss of a job or status. So essentially, the spiral of silence is this phenomenon where they'll withhold their true beliefs because they think that they're in the minority and they fear social punishment.
And say that I think if you voted for Donald Trump, you're ugly. I think you're all freaking ugly, and I think you're dumb as bricks.
I know people don't believe me when I tell them that if you vote for Kamala Harris, you're not really thinking, and they are doing the thinking for you.
And this one has real consequences because when people stay silent, others begin to assume agreement. That silence then reinforces norms that may not actually exist. As those false norms take hold, the most extreme voices tend to become the loudest and most visible. And at the same time, more moderate or even nuanced views can begin to fade. And because careful thinking becomes socially risky. And nuance matters. Nuance recognizes that the truth can exist on multiple sides. It asks hard and clarifying questions, and it's humble enough to admit uncertainty. But productive conversations require safety. And people need to believe that the other side is willing to engage honestly and not attack them personally or shame them socially for their beliefs. Nuance doesn't just signal loyalty to a side, it's seeking to understand. And once nuance disappears, then this self-correction collapses. Self-correction can only happen when people continue to speak openly and honestly. Disagreement has to be expressed safely. And unpopular or minority views, they have to be heard without social punishment. Loyalty to an ideology cannot be the highest value in our society. So why does this happen so often? It's because extremes are easier to reward and to recognize. Extreme positions are usually emotionally satisfying, and they signal strong loyalty. Okay, so last but not least, what I want to talk about today is something called the Abilene paradox. And this is just a little context to what this is. There was a article by Jerry B. Harvey called The Abilene Paradox, The Management of Agreement. And this is from Organizational Dynamics, summer of 1988. And on page 2 of the first column at the bottom, I'm going to read this. The article is concerned with the paradox, the Abilene paradox. Simply stated, it is as follows. Organizations frequently take actions in contradiction to what they really want to do and therefore defeat the very purpose or purposes they are trying to achieve. It also deals with a major corollary of the paradox, which is that the inability to manage agreement is the major source of organizational dysfunction. So this occurs when a group collectively adopts a position that no one actually agrees with because each person assumes the others do. And this applies most often into groups. Each person in the group may have reservations or even privately disagree with the belief, but they assume that they're the only one who feels that way. And to avoid any kind of conflict or social disapproval, they just stay silent. Errors go unchallenged and a false consensus begins to appear real. And over time, silence proves more destructive than disagreement. For the individual who does not agree, they can feel like they're betraying themselves. The social cost of speaking begins to outweigh the value of truth because truth no longer feels safe. And what all this shows is that the breakdown that we're seeing is not simply a failure of logic or intelligence. It's not that people lack information or haven't been exposed to enough data. The problem runs deeper than that. And when silence replaces honesty, false consensus forms and extremes become louder and nuance disappears and self-correction collapses. So beliefs fuse with identity, disagreements feel like a threat, and truth itself, it begins to feel unsafe. And in that kind of environment, people aren't evaluating ideas based on whether they're true, but whether accepting them would cost too much socially or personally. Simply adding more information doesn't fix the problem. In many cases, it makes things worse, and data becomes this ammunition and facts become identity markers, and the very tools that we assume should bring clarity end up reinforcing division. It's not primarily a problem of the mind, it's a problem of perception.